One evening in 1935, at a large hotel in Pennsylvania, New York, thousands of people suddenly arrived. Among them were company executives, bankers, lawyers, salesmen, as well as dentists, accountants, architects, and even people who had traveled all the way from India and Cuba. Why did these thousands of people come? Well, 1935 was the time of the Great Depression in the United States, when a large number of people were unemployed and couldn't even afford to eat properly. Yet, even with empty stomachs, these thousands of people were willing to spend money to buy tickets to listen to a lecture by a man named Carnegie. What exactly was this lecture about? Hello? Today we will discuss the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This book presents Carnegie's core ideas, allowing us to learn from his training program without having to travel all the way to the United States. Carnegie's lectures were incredibly popular at the time. The University of Chicago spent 2 years researching and discovered a phenomenon. After struggling in society for several years, most people gradually realized that the knowledge they gained in school alone was not enough to achieve worldly success. This realization led to the adult education movement, which has continued in the United States until today. The pursuit of success and the emphasis on adult education in American society can be attributed to Dale Carnegie. Many famous figures in American politics and business, such as oil magnate Rockefeller, hotel tycoon Hilton, and Chrysler's founder, as well as several U.S. presidents like Johnson and Kennedy, have taken Carnegie's course. Warren Buffett, the stock market guru, received his Carnegie certification in 1952. He said it was the most important degree he had ever obtained and proudly displayed his certification in the most prominent place in his office. Now, let's analyze the core content of Carnegie's masterpiece, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's difficult for people to reflect on themselves. Carnegie had a deep understanding of people, and he often quoted sayings like, "Knowledge makes one wise to the ways of the world, while understanding of people makes one skilled in writing." Each profession and occupation has its own set of rules, and interpersonal relationships also have their own rules to follow. Carnegie said that human weaknesses are rooted in human genes. Our task is not to fight against them, but to recognize them, accept them, and use them. On May 7, 1931, a massive manhunt took place in New York that shocked the entire nation. The media referred to the criminal involved as Two-Gun Crowley. After intense gunfire exchange with the police, Crowley was eventually captured. After his arrest, Police Commissioner Mulrooney made a statement calling Crowley one of the most dangerous criminals in the history of New York. How did Crowley view himself? In a letter to a friend he wrote, "Beneath my appearance lies a weary heart, weary but not one that would harm anyone." Crowley was sentenced to death, and as he was being escorted to the gallows, he still tried to justify himself, saying, "This is the fate of my self-defense." Carnegie once discussed this matter with Lewis Laws, the warden who housed these prisoners. The warden said, "Very rarely do inmates in prison admit they are bad people. They, just like you and me, share common human nature. That's why they find excuses and explanations for why they would pry open a safe or pull the trigger. They try to find a proper reason for their actions, regardless of whether that reason holds up. They firmly believe that their actions are justified and that they should not be locked up in prison. Just think, if even those unruly criminals in jail believe they haven't done anything wrong, then perhaps the people around you and me are even more inclined to do so." In 99% of cases, regardless of how serious the mistake they commit, people do not blame themselves. Therefore, self-reflection is difficult for humans. We should refrain from criticizing others lightly because criticism is often useless in interpersonal relationships. It only triggers resistance and makes people eager to defend themselves. Criticism is also dangerous as it damages self-esteem and can even lead to resentment. The key to persuading others is to figure out what they want. When fishing, you put bait on the hook that appeals to the fish, like worms and such. Someone might say, "Isn't that common sense?" Yes, indeed. It's something even children understand. So why not try the same approach when fishing for people? Under the sun, the most effective way to influence others is to figure out what they desire. Carnegie had 2 nephews who were studying in college and always made excuses for being too busy to reply to their family's letters. Carnegie said, "I have a way to make them reply." He wrote a letter to his nephews and casually mentioned at the end that he had enclosed $5 with the letter. However, he intentionally forgot to include the money when sending the letter. As expected, his nephews quickly replied, expressing sincere gratitude for their dear uncle's letter. A friend of mine also used a similar method in educating their child. When the friend's child was about to start kindergarten, like most kids, they initially cried and refused to go. However, upon hearing about going to kindergarten, the child became excited and more enthusiastic than their parents. It turned out that ever since the child was over 1 year old, the friend praised them whenever they did something, saying, "You did great, my dear. With your abilities, you'll definitely go to kindergarten." So, in the child's mind, going to kindergarten became an extraordinary thing that they eagerly looked forward to. As they finally approached the time to go to kindergarten, they were the most enthusiastic about going to school every day. As children grow older and develop their own ideas, many parents exhaust all kinds of methods to educate them, scolding them. But is this effective for children? Hoping that children align their thoughts with their parents is unrealistic. It's better to sincerely consider what the child wants and how to fulfill both their desires and the parents' expectations. This applies to adults as well. When you need to persuade someone, it's best not to recklessly state your own needs. Before speaking, consider what the other person wants and what would motivate them to take initiative. Behavior stems from people's needs, and the primary way to persuade others is to trigger their strong desires. The steel magnate, Andrew Carnegie, also achieved tremendous success in business using the same psychological tactics. Once, when Carnegie and George Pullman were competing for the sleeping car business of the Pacific Railroad Company, the steel magnate employed this strategy. Both Carnegie's Central Transportation Company and Pullman's company wanted to secure the sleeping car business, so they engaged in a price war, almost competing with zero profit. In the end, Andrew Carnegie proposed the idea of jointly establishing a new company to Pullman. Pullman listened with great interest but wasn't entirely convinced. Finally, Pullman asked, "If we were to merge, what would the new company be called?" Carnegie quickly replied, "Without a doubt, it would be called the Pullman Palace Car Company." Upon hearing this, Pullman smiled. This conversation completely changed the history of the American steel industry and truly made Carnegie the steel magnate of America. Regardless of who it is, their own name is the most important word to them in the world. When dealing with people, it's often effective to discuss things they like. Our conversation partners aren't genuinely interested in us or our problems, but they are highly interested in their own desires and frustrations. Their toothache is more important to them than a war in a foreign land. The little projects keeping them busy are far more bothersome to them than a magnitude 10 earthquake happening in another state or country. The key to mastering interpersonal relationships is to give more praise and less criticism. Completely rational people in this world are extremely rare. Most people are filled with biases, and their cognition is bound by prejudices, defensiveness, suspicion, fear, jealousy, and arrogance. No one is willing to change their views, so don't easily pick faults with others. In the depths of a person's heart, what matters most is not right or wrong, but their threatened self-esteem. People tend to cling to preformed cognitions, and when those are questioned, they feel resistance. In order to protect their established beliefs, they search for various reasons. If you want to prove something, do it subtly, without making the other person feel cornered. For example, if someone says something wrong, even if you are certain they are mistaken, try saying something like, "What you said is different from what I originally thought. I guess I was wrong. Let's figure out the facts together." People have a basic need to feel important. Everyone believes they are better than others in some aspect. The way to enter someone's heart is to subtly let them know that they are indeed important and strong in a certain way. What should you do? Praise them. There is a fable by Aesop about the north wind and the sun. They were debating who was more powerful, and they decided to see who could get a person wearing a coat to take it off. The wind blew forcefully, becoming even stronger, but the person wrapped their coat tighter. Then it was the sun's turn. It shone on the person, and the person gradually felt warm. They voluntarily took off their coat. So, as long as people feel warmth, they will open their hearts. One of Carnegie's students, Mrs. Jacob, cleverly used this method. The construction workers under her supervision did their job well, but after each day's work, they would scatter construction waste everywhere without cleaning up. So, one day, after the workers had left, she cleaned up the construction site herself and neatly arranged all the leftover wood. The next morning, Mrs. Jacob called the foreman aside and said, "I couldn't believe how clean you guys made the construction site last night. It truly moved me. It looks so beautiful. The neighbors are saying I've found a great group of workers." As a result, from that day on, the workers cleaned up all the remaining scraps and placed them neatly in the corner every day. This reminds me of a true story I've personally encountered. Mr. James Peterson, an education expert, once served as the principal of a top elementary school. One day, he saw a young boy hitting another student and immediately intervened, stopping the boy's behavior. He asked the boy to come to his office after school. When Mr. Peterson returned to his office after school, he saw the boy waiting there. He took out a piece of candy and said, "This is a reward for you because you arrived before me." Mr. Peterson gave the boy another piece of candy and said, "This is also a reward for you because you didn't hit the student. You immediately stopped when I asked you to. That shows you respect me." The boy, somewhat skeptical, accepted the candy. Then Mr. Peterson said, "I went to talk to the other students to understand the situation. You hit the student because he was bullying a girl. That shows you have a sense of justice." Mr. Peterson took out a third piece of candy and handed it to the boy. At this point, the boy started crying and said, "Principal, I was wrong. Even if the student did something wrong, I shouldn't fight with him." Mr. Peterson then took out a fourth piece of candy and said, "You have admitted your mistake. I will reward you with another piece of candy." The conversation ended with 4 candies and 4 praises. A smooth and effective educational communication took place. The young boy acknowledged his mistake voluntarily. Praise is important, so when expressing opinions, many people start with praise. However, they often follow it with "but" to introduce a contradiction. For example, if parents want to change their child's carelessness in studying, they might say, "Great, we are truly proud of your progress this semester, but if you could put more effort into math, your grades would definitely be even better." This choice of words diminishes the credibility of the entire sentence and essentially corrects the child's attitude toward learning. If the word "but" is replaced with "and," the problem is easily solved. "Great, we are truly proud of your progress this semester, and if you continue with this diligent and attentive attitude next semester, your grades will surely be even better." This way, the child accepts the parent's praise because there is no criticism following it. When negotiating with people, emphasize agreement rather than differences. From the beginning, make an effort to make the other person say yes repeatedly, laying a psychological foundation for their positive feedback. A friend of mine works at a bank and after reading this book, decided to try some techniques. He attempted to get customers to provide their contact information. One day, an elderly customer came to the bank for a transaction, but didn't have a mobile phone and didn't want to leave their family's contact information with the bank. How could he persuade the elderly person? He said to the elderly customer, "From your perspective, I think this information isn't necessary to fill out." The elderly person replied, "Yes, exactly. I'm just here to deposit some money." After the customer's response, the bank employee continued, "But I want to ask, in case of an emergency, would you want us to transfer your deposit to your family?" The elderly person answered, "Yes, of course. If you have my family's contact information, you can follow my wishes and transfer the money to them accurately. This way, the money won't be lost." The elderly person responded positively 3 times. Eventually, they dispelled their doubts and happily followed the bank employee's advice. Socrates, one of the wisest philosophers of all time, was able to persuade people effectively. His Socratic method was built upon the strategy of making the other person say yes. When communicating with others, Socrates adopted a clever approach that often forced the other person to nod in agreement. He then seized the opportunity and repeatedly asked questions that made the person keep saying yes. Unconsciously, the person arrived at a conclusion that was completely opposite to their initial position, making them feel noble. They would be willing to help you. 300 years ago, the scientist Galileo said, "You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him discover it within himself." Compared to ideas imposed on us by others, don't we trust our own conclusions more? If the answer is yes, then why force our opinions on others? It's wise to guide them to come to their own conclusions. Nobody likes being pushed into a purchase, and nobody wants to be forced to complete a task. People prefer to feel that they made the decision themselves. Behind everyone's actions, there are actually 2 reasons: a noble excuse and a true motivation. If you want to change someone, help them come up with a more noble reason. During World War I, President Wilson of the United States decided to send a trusted envoy as a peace ambassador to Europe to mediate between countries. When the news reached the Secretary of State, William Bryan, he was eager to seize the opportunity. As a pacifist, he wanted to serve his country and leave a significant mark in history. However, President Wilson appointed another person, Colonel Edward House. Colonel House didn't want to offend Bryan, but had to deliver the president's decision to him personally. Colonel House told Brian, "I heard that I will be sent as a peace envoy to Europe, and disappointment was clearly written on your face. You wanted to take charge personally. I told him that the president thought it would be best to keep this matter low-key. If he sent you personally, everyone would speculate about the famous Secretary of State Brian causing a great stir in Europe." Colonel House's implication was clear. Brian was pleased with the explanation and found it useful. Colonel House understood human nature and knew how to exploit weaknesses. This approach is not exclusive to high-ranking politicians. Even an ordinary supermarket manager can use it. In the food store he managed, an employee often carelessly placed the wrong price tags, causing dissatisfaction and complaints from customers. The manager repeatedly reminded the employee, but with little effect. Finally, he came up with a solution. He called the employee into his office and appointed him as the price tag supervisor responsible for checking if the shelves and price tags corresponded. The new responsibility and title completely changed the employee's attitude. From then on, the employee performed their duties diligently. It sounds childish, but people are often childish. Great people are skilled at using these weaknesses to manage others, and we can also give it a try. Carnegie practiced these principles throughout his successful life. The exploration of human nature, a grand theme, has never ceased throughout history, with various arguments and discussions. In the midst of our mundane lives, we often remain unaware of our own situation and the appearance of our fate. Only by reducing the scale of time can the trajectory of destiny become clear. Dale Carnegie possessed this ability to perceive the subtle and understand the profound. At times, he was rational and objective, delving into the motives behind others' actions. At other times, he was tender and sentimental. His various experiences and stories remained etched in his memory. His examination of human nature was both intimate and distant, neither humble nor arrogant. Every word and every sentence in the book is the result of his thoughts and gains from interpersonal interactions. These experiences are not unique to him, but resonate universally among thousands of ordinary Americans. He distilled and summarized these life experiences into profound insights into human nature, expounding on ways of dealing with people and navigating life. Whether it is an NBA player who emerged from the dark and dilapidated streets, a Silicon Valley elite who started from scratch in a garage, or a political leader who changed the course of history, none of them is exempt from practicing these simple truths. The core of the so-called American dream is to achieve a better life through personal efforts. Carnegie himself spent his entire life practicing these principles. Looking back on my own life, the past is vividly remembered. Dale Carnegie's career was full of ups and downs, making it a compelling story. He grew up on a farm in a rural area of Missouri, and at the age of 12, he saw a train for the first time. However, by the time he was 46, he had traveled to most corners of the world. His footprints could be found everywhere, from Hong Kong and China to Hammerfest in the far north of Europe. The boy who used to pick strawberries in Missouri to help support his family, earning only 5 cents an hour, later became the highest-paid trainer. The young cowherd from the countryside flew around the world, teaching and befriending royalty, presidents, and various business leaders. Carnegie faced hardships during his youth and experienced multiple setbacks on his family's small farm. Floods occurred every year, and the piglets they raised died from cholera one after another. The bank threatened to foreclose on their mortgaged house. After countless despair, Carnegie's parents sold all their belongings, and the family moved to Warrensburg, Missouri. Young Carnegie attended school in town and paid $1 a day for board. However, even this amount was beyond the family's means. He had to walk a minimum of 5 kilometers every day between home and school. The school had a total of 600 students, but there were only 6 students who couldn't afford to live in town, including Carnegie. He felt extremely ashamed of such poverty. As his sense of inferiority deepened, he eagerly sought ways to gain prestige in school. He quickly discovered that certain groups in school were highly esteemed, such as members of the football and basketball teams, as well as those who won debates and speech contests. Carnegie knew he didn't have a talent for sports, so he made up his mind to win a speech competition. He spent several months preparing for the speech, practicing every chance he got. Despite his serious preparation, he encountered failure after failure, which left him deeply discouraged and even contemplating suicide. However, he persevered. One day, he suddenly won. Not just one competition, but every competition. After graduating from college, Carnegie became a salesman, selling correspondence courses. No matter how enthusiastically he recommended these courses, he couldn't meet the performance requirements. so he decided to find a new job in Omaha. After arriving in the southern part of the city, he found a sales job for a company selling soap and lard. Carnegie diligently read various books, visited Native Americans on horseback, played cards with them, and tried to find a way to collect payments. If a grocery store owner ordered bacon and ham but couldn't pay, Carnegie would take a dozen shoes from his shelves in exchange for payment. He sold the shoes to railroad workers and gave the proceeds back to the company. In just 2 years, he revitalized the low-performing sales district and jumped from 4th to 1st place in terms of shipments. The company wanted to give him a raise and promotion, but Carnegie refused and resigned, moving to New York. He intended to support himself by teaching. What would he teach? He reflected on his college years and realized that his confidence, courage, composure, and business communication skills all stemmed from his early training in public speaking. The combination of all the courses he took in college couldn't match the effectiveness of that training. Therefore, he approached the YMCA in New York and asked for a chance to teach a public speaking course for business people. The YMCA agreed, although they knew it wouldn't work because they had previously tried similar courses without success. So they refused to pay Carnegie the $2 wage per night. Carnegie proposed a commission-based teaching arrangement where he would receive a share from the net profits. Over the course of 3 years, the commission paid by the YMCA to Carnegie amounted to $30 per night. The course quickly gained popularity, with members of the YMCA spreading the word, and it rapidly gained recognition in other cities. Carnegie traveled between different cities giving lectures. He later flew to London and Paris, attracting many business people who felt that the available textbooks were too academic and lacked practical value. Initially, Carnegie only intended to offer a public speaking course, but to his surprise, the students were all business professionals. These students hadn't set foot in a classroom for nearly 30 years. They wanted to see immediate results and hoped to apply those skills to business meetings and public speeches the next day. Therefore, Carnegie's course had to be fast-paced and practical. He developed a unique training system that integrated public speaking, sales techniques, interpersonal relationships, and applied psychology with astonishing results. In 1929, the United States experienced an economic collapse during the Great Depression, triggered by the bursting of the real estate bubble. The previously thriving financial industry and the real economy suffered devastating blows, and people's confidence in life plummeted. In 1937, Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, was published. It has remained popular for over 80 years, inspiring countless readers. Dale Carnegie created one of the most profound transformations in adult education in American society. Its impact continues to this day. Although Carnegie consistently encouraged people to pursue success, at the end of the book, he provided a crucial reminder regarding personal happiness and success. He said that when it comes to personal happiness and success, family is far more important than one's career and is even a matter of life and death. He dedicated an entire chapter to explaining the 7 rules for a happy marriage and family life. First, don't nag. Second, don't try to change your partner. Third, avoid mutual blame. Fourth, genuinely appreciate your partner. Fifth, women value details and see true feelings in the little things. Sixth, don't forget courtesy. Be humble and polite to your partner. Seventh, the sexual relationship between partners is important, so don't neglect it. Dale Carnegie passed away in 1955. In a conversation before his death, he said, "I never anticipated that I would change the lives of millions of people." Well, How to Win Friends and Influence People has come to an end here. If you have any gains or thoughts after listening to this discussion, feel free to leave a comment and share. Thanks for watching.